Welcome back. In this chapter, we're going to talk about URLs and links. So, first of all, what is a URL? A URL is a Uniform Resource Locator. In other words, it's an address on the web. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to as Uniform Resource Identifiers, but most often you'll hear URL for Uniform Resource Locator. In other words, it's where documents live. Now, there are many types of URLs. We have relative URLs, absolute URLs, and then we have fragment identifiers. I'm going to walk through each of these different types just so that you can fully understand how they work. First of all, we have relative URLs. The most common of these, you'll see one document pointing to another one. In this case, this URL is pointing to a document named physiology.html, and most servers are case sensitive, so we need to make sure that the document name is actually physiology.html, all lowercase, and it's looking for that file in the same directory as the file we are currently in. So if we were to look at a file system, let's say we were in the index.html page and we're referencing physiology.html, it would be in the same folder. Now here's another example of a relative URL. We have images/sapialatimanus.jpg. Now in this case, this is an address for a document named sapialatimanus.jpg inside of a directory named images that's in the same directory as the current document. So again, looking at the file system, if we're on the index page, we're moving into the images folder and then to sapialatimanus. And notice that the case of the link, the capital S, actually matches the capital S in the URL. Now, another kind of relative URL that we have uses the ./. You don't see this all that often, but ./ simply means start where this document is and then move. So in this case, ./physiology.html is the same as simply saying physiology.html. ./images/sapia-latimanus.jpg is the same as simply saying images/sapia-latimanus.jpg. Where things get a little bit different is when you've got ... as you see here. What ... means is start where you currently are, move up one level in the directory structure, and then look for the document. So in this case, the file physiology.html should exist one directory level above the document that's referencing it. So, in terms of the file system that we've got here, you might have a file inside of videos and it's referencing physiology. So in this case, it needs to move up a level because it's in a subfolder. Taking it a step further, here we have ... images/sapialatimanus.jpg. In this case, we're moving up 2 levels in the directory structure and then moving down a level into the images folder and then to the file. So in terms of our file system, we might be inside of a folder within the videos folder. So we want to move back up to the videos folder, and then we want to move out to the outer folder and then into the images folder and then to the actual image that we're looking for within that folder. Relative URLs, when you start using ... and so on and so forth, can get a little confusing, which is why we have absolute URLs. Absolute URLs begin with a /. Now the / simply indicates that the URL that you're referencing starts at the root level, and that means the primary folder that your site exists within. So if I say /physiology.html, it doesn't matter where the file is that's referencing this URL in this way exists in terms of the directory structure. It simply points to a physiology.html file that exists in the root folder of the site. Now if we were to reference /images/sapialatimanus.jpg, this means that the image file that we're referencing would exist within an images folder which is in the root of the document. So it doesn't matter if we're 2 levels, 5 levels, 18 levels deep in the directory structure of the website, the image file is always within the images folder in the directory root. Just like that. So absolute URLs are a little bit better because they're more predictable, and it means that files are more portable within the overall directory structure of the site. And you don't need to keep track of how many ... and how many slashes and all that sort of stuff. You just know that that first slash is always for the root, and then you do the rest of the URL based on the directory structure of your site. Now, another form of absolute URL actually includes the domain and the protocol that are being used to reference the file. So if I say http://aaronhifengustafson.com/iheartcuttlefish/physiology.html, that is going to point to physiology.html within the iHeartCuttlefish subfolder within the root of aarongustafson.com, and it's referencing it via HTTP as the protocol. Similarly, I can reference google.com within HTTPS, which is secure HTTP, and that would point to whatever the index file is that's defined by the server. That might be index.html, it might be index.php, default.asp. All web servers give us a way of defining what that index file is, and whatever that file is named, that's what will be served if you just went to the domain by itself. By default, that's typically index.html. It's worth noting that in some cases you may see a URL that starts with 2 slashes. This is a particularly odd one, and it's something that's only just starting to become more prevalent. This URL points to the physiology.html file within the iHeartCuttlefish subfolder of aarongustafson.com, but it doesn't define the protocol for accessing that URL. The protocol is left off and is simply implied by the protocol of the existing page. So if the existing page that is linking to this particular URL is under HTTPS, so it's a secure server connection, then it would request this file over HTTPS. If it's a standard HTTP request, then this URL would be requested over HTTP. Again, you don't see this all that often, but it is starting to crop up, which is why I wanted to point it out. Now, the last kind of URL I want to talk about are fragment identifiers. Fragment identifiers point to an ID on the page. Now, if you remember earlier on, I showed an instance of an H1 with an ID attribute. Now, the ID attribute has a value, and if that value were to match the term after the hash in a URL, then the browser would actually anchor to that element. It would scroll down the page until that element was at the top of the page in order to bring focus there. So the first example here we see hash camouflage, and the second example we see hash camouflage within the physiology.html document. Now, fragment identifiers can be used with virtually any URL, so we could even extend it to being used with a fully qualified absolute URL here to physiology.html within iHeartCuttlefish on the aaron-gustafson.com domain. So if I boot up a browser and show typing in that URL, hit enter, what you'll see is I'll go to that page and it'll immediately jump down to it. That's pretty awesome. Now there are two other kinds of links that I want to bring up really quickly, and that's mail to and tell links. These can be used for pointing out email addresses or telephone numbers, and browsers automatically will trigger your email client to open if you click on a mail to link. If your browser is on a device that supports making a phone call, clicking the tell link will actually prompt the user to dial that number. Now that we understand all of the different URL types, we'll use most of these in the context of the A element, which we've seen a little bit in a couple of examples already. So the A element is used for links within the document body. So here we have a simple example, the Cuttlebone, and I want to link that to a section about the Cuttlebone on another page. Since that section in the other page exists on the physiology.html page, I'm going to go ahead and insert an anchor with an href pointing to physiology.html and anchoring to the Cuttlebone ID. Now here's a second example from the footer of my site. The text content of the site was lovingly borrowed from the Wikipedia article on cuttlefish on 15 August 2014. I've got my nice little time element in there, and so on and so forth. And I've got the Wikipedia article on cuttlefish and also the licensing, the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. I can link both of these also using the anchor element to point to the Wikipedia article or to the text of the Creative Commons Attribution license. Now we can also, as we saw earlier with the canonical example in one of the earlier chapters, we can link to other pages within the head of the document using the link element. We saw that with rel equals canonical, so for the canonical information about this particular site. We can also use it to link to alternate content. This is an example from my blog, which links to an XML file for the Atom feed for my site. Now the last one I want to go over is the image element, which is used to embed images, obviously, into the page. And just as you would suspect, and as we've seen in a couple of examples already, you use the source attribute on the img tag to say where that image is. So in this chapter, we've talked about all of the different types of URLs, how to create links to other pages, and also how to create references to other files that we want to make available to our users when they view our page. Now in the next chapter, I'm going to take a deeper dive into images, specifically looking at traditional image usage, as well as responsive images, which will be helpful in dealing with multiple screen sizes and resolutions and the like. I'll see you in a few.